Goran Dragic and Bam Adebayo were both injured in Game 1 of the NBA Finals, and their status for the rest of the series is a bit of an unknown at this point. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. In this video, we're going to talk about Goran Dragic's plantar fascia tear and what could be going on with Bam Adebayo's shoulder strain. As always, if you enjoy learning about this unique side of sports, please consider subscribing to the channel, and be sure and go follow me over on Twitter for more real-time breakdowns and analysis, and let's get started. We're going to start off with Dragic's injury, and this is something that I don't think I've actually ever covered on this channel, a plantar fascia rupture or plantar fascia tear. So this is the play where it happened here. Dragic is driving into the lane, going up against Rondo, and keep an eye here, basically as he comes backward and pushes off of his left foot here at this point, that's when this injury would have occurred. If we continue the rest of the sequence here, people saw this little bit of rippling in his calf kind of when he pushed off here, and so there was fear about an Achilles rupture. But remember, anytime you push off, you're activating your calf muscles, and so you're gonna see a little bit of movement there. So just seeing movement in the calf muscles alone doesn't mean someone's had an Achilles rupture. But nonetheless, Dragic pushes off here, which is certainly when that would have occurred. And again, initially I thought when his foot kind of shifted here when he planted, maybe that was causing something. If we continued in the rest of the sequence here, it looked like about at this point, he might have appeared to have stepped on Rondo's foot in one of the views. So what the heck is the plantar fascia? If we look at our anatomy model here, this is basically a right foot. So we've got our tibia, we have our fibula, and then of course we have the ankle joint, the foot bones, and then we have the different foot muscles shown here as well. The plantar fascia is fascia, or this band of connective tissue that sits on the bottom surface of the foot. The plantar side of the foot is the undersurface, and so that's why this is the plantar fascia. If we rotate our foot model here, this band of tissue that we see on the bottom of the foot running from the calcaneus, or the heel bone, all the way up to the toes is going to be our plantar fascia. You can see it really is this very thick band of collagen fibers that span the bottom surface of this foot. Now, the primary function of the plantar fascia is to provide support on the undersurface of the arch of our foot. I'm going to get rid of all these different little foot muscles here to highlight this point a little bit better, and then also bring in an anatomy model to show you as well. So now that I've hit all those other muscles, this is a very good view of the arch of our foot. Arch, of course, being this arch shape that you can see here through the bones, but then the plantar fascia is that undersurface of the arch. Whenever somebody plants their foot and walks, you're gonna get some compression as the foot goes downward. That's gonna cause that arch to basically expand outwards. Let me show you. So if we take this model here of a foot, obviously there's no plantar fascia here, there's no muscles, but if you can imagine every time I push down on the foot, you can see how it basically has a tendency to want to flatten out or turn into a flat foot. What that plantar fascia does by running between these borders is it helps to maintain that structure when you plant your foot so that your arch doesn't completely collapse and give out and cause your foot to go just completely flat. Now, of course, what that means is that whenever you're walking, pushing off like we saw Dragic doing here, you're putting tension on that plantar fascia. Of course, plantar fasciitis is an extremely common diagnosis we see in sports medicine, and that's more chronic degeneration and damage of those fibers that occurs over a long period of time, typically due to excessive load and wear on that plantar fascia. So now if we turn back to the play where Dragic got hurt, imagine here when he's in this position about to push off with his left foot, that he's got this tight band of tissue running along the bottom surface of his foot. As he goes and plants here, already in this position, you can see how the foot is going to stretch that undersurface of the plantar fascia out. Again here, it's probably right in this moment as he's making that push off that it tears. And you can even see kind of after he steps, he kind of looks back down here at his foot like knowing something felt off. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, plantar fascia ruptures are quite rare. They're typically going to be associated with somebody who's had chronic or long-term plantar fasciitis that's caused that tissue to become a little bit weak and impaired. There's also an important association where people who have had steroid injections around the plantar fascia can be at a higher risk of plantar fascia ruptures because that steroid can actually weaken and damage that tissue, making it more possible to tear. But something like this for Dragic to just push off and tear his plantar fascia is a pretty darn uncommon injury. Of course, everybody wants to know what his chances are for the rest of the series, and to be totally honest with you, this is a wide range of possibilities that without exactly examining him and knowing his presentation here and his imaging, it's hard to give a good estimation. The Heat have said they're going to reevaluate him, so they haven't ruled him out yet. But if you imagine if that's completely torn, now you've lost a lot of structural support for your foot. It's going to be extremely painful, and you're going to have a harder time getting around. Now, some examples of past NBA players with plantar fascia tears. As Tom Haberstroh pointed out on Twitter, Malcolm Brogdon missed 8 weeks last year with a torn plantar fascia. From Bobby Marks, Joe Johnson had a torn plantar fascia, and basically it sounds like didn't miss any games, just got injections to help with pain relief, but wasn't very effective going forward. This isn't something that you just automatically take to surgery and sew back up. Typically, management of this is conservative, where depending on the severity of the tear, you're putting somebody in a walking boot and you're allowing that tissue to basically scar down and heal up. Of course, you can see here on the undersurface with this plantar fascia how big and broad it is, so depends entirely on the severity of the tear and his symptoms. He could have a very small minor tear that would certainly be able to make him come back sooner, or it could be a more full, complete tear that's going to give a longer recovery. So we really can't say one way or another. If I had to lean one way or the other, I'd say most likely he's probably going to miss some time. But again, without seeing all of his imaging and specifically evaluating him, hard to exactly predict and be too confident. So now let's turn to Bam Adebayo and the reports of his left shoulder strain. This one's a little bit more straightforward and kind of expected based on what we've seen from Bam. You guys remember I did this video talking about his play of the year candidate block, and I talked in that video about how, one, I was really surprised that he didn't dislocate his shoulder based on this position his arm was forced into. I also mentioned though that it wouldn't surprise me if we found out he was in fact having some shoulder pain or soreness that didn't exactly present as a full dislocation, but still could have caused some injury. Of course, Adebayo said that after the fact, he had some numbness in his fingers, which in all reality was probably more from the wrist hyperextension than it was from the shoulder position. If it was nerves coming from the shoulder, you would have expected more numbness in the whole arm as opposed to just in the fingers, but still can think about stretching to the nerves either in the wrist or up through the rest of the arm. But again, we didn't really hear anything about a specific injury. He said he was fine. But then later on in the series, we saw him get tangled up during a play, and we had kind of vague reports about arm pain. So this was the play, I think it was in game 4, where Bam hurt his arm again. And you can see here, he basically gets tangled up with Tatum and kind of gets that left arm hooked under Tatum, and it kind of gets pulled across his body, which to me certainly looked like it stressed his shoulder. I know afterwards here, Bam was holding his wrist, and so unfortunately, the commentators, the media, latched onto this idea that he had a wrist injury, when in reality, this is just the way that somebody with a shoulder injury will kind of hold their arm to support it because of the pain coming from the shoulder. By supporting the arm at the wrist or at the elbow, you take some of the load off the shoulder and you make it feel better. The other kind of clue here was this was the first time we saw Bam wearing this t-shirt. Usually he doesn't wear this, and to me that says something's changed. Potentially he's got some taping on that shoulder that he was maybe dealing with some soreness from before, and now we've seen him continue to wear the shirt, possibly indicating that there was some irritation with the shoulder. But again, all seemed okay, played pretty well the rest of the series. But then of course tonight here in game 1, we saw him go out again. So now we're looking at the game 1 injury here, and we can see him going up against Howard. And basically it's this initial contact to Bam's left shoulder that is likely what flared things up again. You know, anytime we see somebody make direct contact or fall on the side of their shoulder, we think about an AC injury or a shoulder sprain. In this position, actually, it almost looks like Howard makes contact more with the back portion of Bam's arm, kind of pushing his shoulder forward a little bit, kind of similar to that position where Tatum kind of inadvertently pulled the arm in the previous series. Nonetheless, though, Bam, of course, is able to go shoot his free throws, but it's unfortunately when he's trying to get his own rebound that he tweaks that shoulder again. So we can see him coming up here, and as he's reaching over to get that rebound, again, you can tell he's kind of hunched up and that arm is getting pulled forward, irritating that shoulder again. We can see him after this play. He comes down, clearly uncomfortable. Again, going to that position where he's kind of grabbing and supporting his left arm, being in more pain. Now, the Heat are calling Adebayo's injury a shoulder strain, and typically a strain signifies injury to a muscle, whereas a sprain denotes injury to a ligament. But sometimes these words do get used interchangeably. But based on all the shots he's taken to his shoulder, all the pulling he's had applied to his shoulder, I'd be worried about multiple different possibilities for his pain. If we look at an example of a left shoulder here in the anatomy corresponding to it, technically all these muscles would be considered possible shoulder muscles. Even the trapezius can be considered part of the shoulder girdle. Classically, of course, though, we're thinking more about the rotator cuff muscles, when we see an athlete with a shoulder strain or a shoulder muscle injury. So we'll hide the rest of the muscles here to focus just on that rotator cuff. But essentially what you can think of the rotator cuff as is this group of 4 muscles that are helping to provide some stability of the humerus within the shoulder joint. You can imagine all the pulling, all the twisting, the stress on Bam's shoulder could certainly have caused some strain or irritation to these rotator cuff muscles. Anytime you're doing things outstretched from your body, like when he was trying to get that rebound here in game 1, can put more strain on those muscles, causing more pain. Now, the other thing based on that block he had earlier against the Celtics that we have to think of is a labrum injury or an injury to the shoulder joint. Go watch that video for a little more detail about these labrum injuries, but this is going to be something that's going to be more deep inside the shoulder itself. It's that little lining of tissue that sort of expands the shoulder socket, but anytime that arm bone is stressed or pulled, it can irritate that labrum and cause some shoulder injury. So bottom line, Bam's injury is a little bit more vague, but fits with this recent history of what he's been going through with his injury to his left arm / wrist / shoulder. Now we know really this does seem like it was the shoulder the whole time. I expect he's got a better chance of playing more in this series than Dragic does, but we'll have to see when we get more information and how they respond to treatment. So that's it for this video, guys. A doozy, 2 injuries here packed into one, but big news, big things going on here in the NBA with game 1 of the finals. Let me know any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you in the next one. Bye.